There we go. Alright, we're good. We're good. I got it here. Everything's fine. It's all good. I had to quickly add a new stream key in. After that, we were fine. I didn't realize, that it got updated. So, I was like, yeah, I'll hit the go live button and I'll be fine. But we're here. Alright. Hello. I got it all. Let me just quickly pull this up here. Thank you, everybody who came in and is sticking through. I know that, it's a weird setup for some people, because obviously I'm going live on, like, multiple channels, but I really appreciate being able to do this. Flat Matt, thank you for following It Gets Better. Hope you're doing well today. For me, I really love being on this platform and being able to help this channel grow. It Gets Better is something that means a lot to me. And whenever we get to see more people, Clyde, thank you for following It Gets Better. Being able to bring new people here constantly every time and show people how much I appreciate this and how good these kind of conversations can be, I think is just a very, underrated thing to have. So, thank you. Hang on one second, chat. I'm just trying to pull up the dashboard for It Gets Better here. There we are. Sloth, thank you for following It Gets Better. Alright, chat. Now, we are here over at It Gets Better. So profits from the stream go to the organization. So, any, like, subscribers and stuff like that are, the charity. Yeah. I am here more so for, like, storytelling and helping to, just have more of a face, because the beauty of It Gets Better is that they specialize in, storytelling and just being this face, especially as they tend to work with a lot of queer youth. So sometimes they just need to see representation. So between, like, Twitch and TikTok and Instagram, they are doing a lot of posting and trying to just be present. Because a lot of the time, I know, especially for myself, I need that presence as well. It's one of those things where it's funny, because we're also going to be talking about that today, where I feel like the more present and representation you have on a platform or in media, the more you just feel better about yourself, and the more that you feel like you can accept yourself. So I think that's such a huge thing to have, and a rather undervalued aspect when it comes to people trying to explore maybe their sexuality, maybe themselves. Also, the pronouns are now working, so I love that. Kaylin, I had no idea. That must be a new follower emote. I have not seen that before. I love it. I love it. Yeah, plus there's a bunch of different perspectives as well. I'm not the only one who streams on here. There are, more than a dozen people who share the stream. And I am lucky that I have been able to be here pretty much, actually not pretty much, since, like, its inauguration on Twitch. And so I have been able to, see many different perspectives, and, like Zaz is saying, different stages of themselves, whether it's more like early on in their coming out, or they are fully transitioned. Maybe they just decided for the first time this year that they wanted to announce that they're bi, and they want to share that journey. Like, we have so many different folks that I really appreciate. And I always like to pop in, like, every once in a while. I think I come out to, like, a stream, like, once a week, and I just go, like, hi, fellow It Gets Better ambassador, and I check in, and I see how things are there, But that's what I I feel very strongly about this. You know, it's one of those things where I look forward to being able to be on here. It also makes me think a little bit more, because coming up with a specific topic is something that I sometimes struggle with on my own streams. But so like, I'll get messaged a week prior to going live, and they'll be like, "Hey, do you have an idea for what you're gonna talk about?" And I kid you not, I'll stare at my computer for like 10 minutes, and I'll be like, "All right, think what's something we can do to talk about, what's something good, and what's something that I feel like I can, you know, have a conversation on." And so for me right now, that's going to be queer representation in media, especially because, you know, not to go into like full details there, but, you know, there's been a lot of anti-trans and anti, you know, even like queer bills that have been getting passed lately. And I feel as though I wanted to at least spread some positive light on some more specific, you know, aspects in media that I have very much enjoyed, in terms of being able to, you know, feel like I'm a little bit more represented. So I am gonna quickly open up Pokemon, and chat, I want you to be proud of me. I wrote down like a list. I was like, hold up. I am going to make sure that I am prepared today. I wanted to make sure people knew what I was talking about. And I was like, I wanted to find characters that I knew I could actually talk about. Like, let me show you real quick. I'll show you the list right here. We go real quick to... Is this it? Is this what I want? Hang on. This is probably not gonna do it. Okay, wait. Yeah. Oh, yeah, here we go. I'll just do that. It's cropped, but you can see right here, this entire list are all different characters from shows and media. So I have definitely... Oh, never mind. It's just on the screen. Well, that's embarrassing. Hang on, there we go. Oh, well. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about this because I remember when I had first come out, one of the things that I was really looking for were other queer characters. And for me, it was anime. And the reason I did anime is just because that's what I tend to watch. But a big reason why I wanted to find them was because when I first had come out, I dealt with this feeling of doubt in myself. You know, part of it was almost like denying myself, but there was a bit of just overall doubt. And, oh, surely this can't be me, you know? That kind of thing. And I would almost fight myself. But what ended up happening is that I watched, specifically, I went back in my head and I started to look at certain characters that I, you know, watched early on with anime. And so, like, the first one, I know is pretty well known in terms of anime. And if you've ever watched Ouran High School Host Club, the main character, Haruhi, the whole premise of the show is a girl who doesn't really care about her looks or anything like that, or how she's gonna be perceived. Walks to school with, like, a, you know, in the guy's uniform, and gets mistaken as a guy. Ends up getting to this point where she breaks, like, something in the host club. And if you don't know host club in Japan, that is pretty much a, you know, a way of making whatever the desired, person happy by, like, being, like, attentive to them. Whether that mean, a girl wanting a girl or a guy wanting... This one was all guys that worked there. But because they mistaken Haruhi as a guy, they were like, you broke this, you have to pay this off by working at our host club. And for, like, the first episode or so, it isn't until the end of the episode where you realize that she's born a female. And so a lot of this journey is her sort of, it's kind of comical with the, trying to not be found out that she's a girl wearing the guy's clothes, and all the girls are swooning over her because they think that she's one of the prettiest guys and one of the more popular members of this host club, but she really just doesn't, she doesn't put stock into gender or, like, identity. She cares about identity, but it's more like she doesn't let that be her determining factor on whether or not she, associates with you or likes you. She is the closest thing to, in my opinion, pansexual and gender fluid without it being really spoken about. And part of why is really just because of how early on in the 2000s it was made. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kaylin or Andy, but I think it must have been written in, like, the early 2000s. I know I watched it when I was 10, and so that was the anime in, like, 2007. So it must have been written mid to early 2000s. So the terminology that would have been used probably just wasn't there yet, or it wasn't widely not accepted, but it wasn't outrageously mentioned. Anime was 2005 to 2006, so it could have even been written in the 90s. Besides, it doesn't really matter, does it? Why should I care about appearances and labels anyway? It's all on the inside that counts. Exactly. Like, that is an iconic quote from Haruhi. And it really shows that she just looks beyond. She, like, cares more about, like, the soul of the person. And that was, like, the first time that I had watched any anime that could have had, again, whether it's a cross-dresser, you want to say, whether it's gender fluid, obviously you don't want to call a gender fluid person cross-dressing, but there is no true term for her because it hasn't been outright documented. So we use all these other terms because she just wants to live whatever life. You don't want to put that label on her because, again, that's literally anti her character. She just wants to admire and appreciate people. And for me, that was, like, the first time I had seen a character like that in any show. And then I've told this story, maybe even on It Gets Better, but I told this story quite a couple times to my own community. Right after watching Ouran High School Host Club, I found this one manga because I like, looked up things that were similar. And so I found this one manga called No Bra. And the story of that is you have this one character who they had a really good friend in preschool. And obviously, when you're in like preschool, things like gender and, you know, even like names kind of are irrelevant to you. You just, if you like a person, you like a person. And it's really just that simple. So they were good friends, and then they, the one main character, ended up moving. And so they got separated until college or high school. And, you know, the story starts with the main character getting all excited because their friend that they, you know, hung out with in preschool was going to live with them and go to their same high school. You know, obviously this sounds like something that might not be as common in America, but, you know, in Japan, going to a different high school and, like, living on your own, a little bit more on, like, the common end of things. But, so what ends up happening is that this person moves in, and all of a sudden, they're like, hi, I'm so excited, and they show, like, a scene of them, like, tackling the friend and hugging them, but their appearance and everything about them and how they're presenting themselves is feminine. And all of a sudden, the main character is sitting there like, is this the right person? Like, they're almost, like, doubting, like, they're confused, and it pretty much is this journey of them sort of starting off as not really having any sort of title, but just enjoying wearing, you know, girls' clothes and presenting them. And then toward the there's definitely going to be spoilers in a lot of what I'm talking about here, because there's just no way for me to avoid a lot of, like, non-spoiler talk. But the best way to put it is that the main, you know, the main character who is going through all of this stuff, they find out that they're assigned male at birth. They force them to wear the male uniform. And so there's this whole, like, outcry. You can see how physically depressed that they are in having to wear this clothes. And it's this, like, really sad couple chapters. And then, long story short, the entire, like, school loves, like, this character is beloved in the school. So they end up pretty much going to the school board and being like, I think their name was Yuki. I didn't remember this one because I didn't write this down initially. But allow Yuki to, you know, wear what they want. And you can see it starts off as this, like, oh, this, you know, maybe they just like wearing the girls' clothes. But it becomes this point where it was so important to their identity, their, you know, person of who they are. And that they really did end up feeling more comfortable with themselves over the idea of having female pronouns. And it ends up becoming this, you know, transitioning story. And again, I read this when I was 11. One of the first mangas I actually read from start to finish. And I just remember being, and well, just wondering, why was I so attached to that character? Why did I care so much about this story? And it didn't click until I was 20 and starting to come out. Those two characters were probably, like, my first real instances that I felt like I could feel like there was something there that I wanted. Something that I appreciated a sense of compatibility with, you know? And I think that in itself... Is this a shiny? Okay, no. I was like, is that a shiny Totodle I'm staring at? I couldn't tell. And so, like, those two were specifically, like, very important early on for me and my, like, understanding of gender and honestly just, like, very, like, queer-based things in general. Because, again, I didn't grow up with, like, any people that were, like, queer in my family or in, like, my dynamic. A lot of what I got, I pretty much learned, or I would get through media, which again furthers why I think it's so important to have these kind of talks. Now, it's funny because I've also told the story about how I've picked my name, but I'll get to that in a second. I want to make sure I read Saz's message here. It's interesting on how varied manga can be. Like, on an outsider, you just think it's all Naruto and methods of sharing story, not just one genre. Yeah! It's wild. There is a definite preconceived notion, and it's understandable, because in the early 2000s, that's really all that manga would be, that would be known. Because anime, they wanted to appeal to America, and how they thought they had to appeal to America was action, violence, adventure. And so, what did we get? Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, One Piece. You know, obviously you had some action that were more, you know, with them presenting characters, which we'll also get into. But I'm not going to talk about what show it is yet, but you can probably take a guess if you know me. So, the ability to, and it's why when I go to Barnes & Noble, I specifically am seeking out, they use the term Yuri. Yuri is pretty much girl love. So I look specifically for girl love manga. And I can find 5 to 6 to a dozen, depending on the day, of various stories. And then multiple chapters of those stories. And even as somebody who, like, frequents Barnes & Noble over the past, like, 5 years, because I've been really, like, invested in manga, and seeing just how much they have delved into the manga and how much they've expanded on that. That in itself has also been, like, a huge thing. Just being able to see other, like, forms of representation. So, back to the name aspect. So, as a lot of you know, my name is Chloe. And when I first was coming out, I was looking for a name that I didn't know anybody else personally had, because it would have felt really awkward for me, and I don't know if anybody else has chosen names and maybe they can relate to this, but I felt like it would have been awkward for me to choose a name for somebody that I already know having that name, just because I already associate that name with this person. And so I didn't want to feel like I was, you know, picking that name because they had it, or, you know, I wanted no preconceived notions. And so I was looking and I stumbled across the name Chloe. And Chloe means to bloom or to blossom. And for me, that felt very fitting for a trans girl to, you know, bloom into her own, blossom into her own, into, like, the woman I want to be. And that in itself is a... No, Chloe's not short for anything. And so that was the, you know, direction that I went with it. But also, my freshman year, going into sophomore year of college, there was a game that my cousin raved about, that he wanted me to play, and him and another one of my friends couldn't stop talking about it. And so I played it. And I was crying over some of the emotional moments. And how I hadn't felt that emotion in a game. That game was Life is Strange. And specifically, I adored the character Chloe in that. And she, in her own right, is, you know, somebody else that's worth just mentioning. Because I'm sure a lot of queer people maybe played that game. Maybe they discovered a little bit more about themselves through Chloe. Without going through, again, too many spoilers, Chloe is very... just... she has her best friend Max, who they share a very beyond friendship bond, but she's also looking for another one of her friends who went missing, who they were, again, closer than friends. Now, again, I'm not going to put labels on whether she's lesbian or bi. I'm not going to say the wrong thing, so I'm just going to, you know... there's definitely some queer beyond her, but she was just this very... I guess the right way to put it is... She knew what she wanted, and she also wanted what's best for the people she cared about. She wanted to, you know, continue to have these close-knit relationships, but also wanting to see these people succeed in whatever it is that they were doing, and wanted to be like that best cheerleader. I loved the entire relationship that she had with Max. She was, honestly, she's very unlike me. I personally feel like, because I see her as the friend that I need. You know, she is this very strong-willed woman who, you know, will push her friends. And sometimes I know for a fact I need that. And some other people definitely need that. It's not the easiest thing to advocate for yourself. And sometimes you just need that friend who will do it for you or give you that push. Obviously, you don't want it to become too much of a habit where you're relying on that friend. But I think that to have that friend goes beyond not having that friend. Characters are great ways to understand yourself. For you, books, manga, anime are definitely some characters you enjoy and resonate with more. Yeah, I will be honest. I wanted to incorporate more traditional books. However, my lack of book reading means that I felt like I couldn't do that conversation justice, personally. So, but I know for a fact just how many, like, wonderful stories can be crafted in, like, book form for people to just, you know, find self-identity. That's why people delve into books. That's why people obsess over, like, a book or two, because, you know, maybe it's the first time that they related to a character in a way that, you know, they felt represented. Which is, again, kind of the whole point of this conversation we're having. You know, we're talking about how... I think it's... Is that... No, that's not the shiny, right? Damn. It, like, shined in the light for a second. I wasn't sure. But... So, pretty much what I was saying is that, like, you know, we need that representation to feel like we exist, that we are seen, and sometimes it's hard to find that. You wrote your master's thesis on queer futurities and YA literature. Kaylin, I love that. I think one of my goals is to get into back into more like traditional reading. And when I pitched this topic to talk about, I didn't wanna, you know, list any characters that were queer coded. Like, I wasn't gonna go in on why Alice is good for queer representation in Twilight, because I feel like that's putting a label on somebody that isn't necessarily, like, I feel like it's wrong to put that label just because they're queer coded. Obviously, if you want to find connections in that, that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't want to go with anybody that wasn't, like, explicitly queer in some capacity. Because some people don't want to be labeled, and just like how some people try to, you know, maybe the unfortunate reality is that some people get forced to detransition. Some people get forced to, you know, be no longer gay, even though that's a clear thing that you can't change out of somebody. So if I do the adverse of putting queer on somebody, then I feel like I'm doing an injustice in that, right? So you can find similarities. I'm not gonna outwardly, you know, list somebody as queer unless they, you know, pretty much there's information out there on it. Your favorite character in a book series is a chaotic bi guy, and you honestly never seen so much more in a character. And I'm sure, Andy, like, let me know. How good do you feel having that, like, representation there? Unfortunately, at least in the US, it's probably easier to find masculine people find characters, since there are just more books with main male characters. You almost wish there were more ambiguous books along with the lines of, like, what Metroid did with the Samus reveal. You know? I think that is a very valid feeling, and you're definitely right. I think that we do often have, you know, at the root of society, it is still male dominated, even in, like, queer literature. And sometimes it's hard to find that character for yourself. Doug, thank you for following It Gets Better. Hope you're doing well today. You know, on the topic of, like, characters that I think, I brought this up about early 90s anime, and how a lot of them were action and adventure, but some of them were very, you know, action-y, but still geared toward a more femme-identifying individual. And we all know that, if you know me, I love Sailor Moon. And Sailor Moon, there's something more specific to go into to talk about with Sailor Moon. Where Sailor Moon suffered being translated by 4Kids in the early 90s. And what I mean by that is, Sailor Moon has very clear lesbian characters in the forms of Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus. Iconic. Anybody who has watched Sailor Moon knows them. And you want to know what 4Kids did back then? They called them cousins. Cousins living together. 4Kids was like, no, American audiences can't handle this couple being gay. And so, while it was very obvious that they were, in fact, not cousins, there was still the writing and the change toward it. Now, there's a new way of watching Sailor Moon called Sailor Moon Crystal. I think it's on Netflix. Where they are not referred to as cousins. So if you want the experience without it being washed, I think that that is probably the better way to view it. But it really is like, you know, the tragic case of sometimes media gets, you know, maybe it comes out at the wrong time, or maybe it isn't, I don't want to say ready, because it's ready, but based off of how American society was, they didn't think that they should put that there. And it's quite saddening to think about, because I know for a fact myself and many other queer individuals just love Sailor Moon. And those characters are a big, you know, just factor in feeling like you exist. Especially something that was written as early as it was. And I think that there's probably people out there that have watched Sailor Moon, and because of 4Kids, don't even realize that they're gay. And it's sad to think about that, because who knows, obviously, how things would have gone. Maybe Sailor Moon wouldn't be the behemoth that it can be in America if it was marred with controversy. But being gay shouldn't be a controversy. So if society was just accepting of it as early as it was, then a moment like that wouldn't have ever happened. CBYN also had some issues. What is CBYN? I don't think I know that off the top of my head, Clyde. But it's like the only gay book film where it doesn't start out as some secret. I definitely have seen like some shows more recently just start off with the character being obviously, you know, queer. Call Me Your Name. Call Me By Your Name. Oh, I've never heard of that. What is it on? In the books, it's an amazing representation. It shows, based on the books, that it really dropped the ball and made you feel like you have to be in a same-sex relationship to be seen as queer. See, that's like that is its own like thing there, where, you know, it's like the whole bi-erasure thing, where people that are bisexual are in a straight passing couple, and so people are just like, no, you're not queer, and like there's that whole issue of people doing that. So it started showing me. See, I am not very well known for traditional media, as you've seen with like gaming and the anime that I'm talking about. I know more on the, you know, other aspects that I have delved into. For me, anime and gaming was that major thing for me. I have never really been a big movie watcher. So, movies, films, and stuff like that, I had to put the most research in. And a lot of my stuff for traditional media that I have is more recent, aside from one. And so, you know, on the topic of like those media things, and you were talking about like the secrets, I think the closest thing to a recent show not really making your character a secret would be like Euphoria, where Jules, as far as I remember, super early on, is known that she is trans. At least to to us, we know that she is. And she deals with a lot of trauma. Obviously, that show is a very dramatic show. But Jules in itself, I was finding a lot of similarities in myself, comparing myself to her. They did her hormones in the pilot. Yeah, and that's in itself something that, you know, isn't shown very often. I'm looking back to, do you remember a couple weeks ago when there was an anti-trans bill trying to get passed, and people were coming up to the stand talking about it, and this trans masked person comes up and literally does their HRT in front of the entire group. And that might have seemed something like, you know, for us, hell yeah. But also the amount of people that are seeing and were able to experience what HRT looks like for some people. Because to some, they will never know because they're not going to put the effort in to learn. So that one individual doing that puts it into the eyes of so many people. And same thing with Jules. Like, doing her HRT and her whole... I mean, on top of the fact that, you know, she's written as this openly loving of anybody kind of character. Not Game of Something Makes You Happy is the musical. Rhino was one of the first musicals outright to have bi-queer relationships that came out in 96, and it showed the characters kissing. Honestly, I love that. And Zaz, maybe you can answer that. For high school plays, because I know Rent is a very common high school play. How did high school plays handle that? Your friend had to ask you what Jules was doing in the pilot because she didn't know. People just aren't exposed to it. Exactly. So, the more in media that we have characters like Jules who can expose you to what being trans or being queer is like, you start to understand a lot of the feelings that people were having in terms of us, because we go through a lot. And obviously, I think what also helps is when Rent was definitely not a high school play where you're from. I think we had Rent. It's probably more common in colleges. I'm pretty sure we did Rent in my school. But I know that some schools all have, like, outright banned Rent because... and, like, other ones, just because I didn't realize that it was all those relationships, but I know they're just banned. You're in the Bible Belt? Yeah, I'm in New Jersey, so a little different. And, you know, like, even before Jules in Euphoria, I think what also helps is when you have characters that are trans individuals portraying a trans character. So then you look at, like, Orange is the New Black and Laverne Cox and, you know, that whole character, because, you know, Orange is the New Black was one of the first shows that got Netflix on the face for creating media beyond just being a source of, you know, internet. Or, I think, is that one shiny? Let me see here. I think this one's shiny. I think that one right there, on the side. Yeah, that one's shiny. Look at it being a little different. Just get over here. Come on, little buddy. Get over here. I just need to catch you. Come on. Alright. No, get in the water. No, no, battle me. Battle me. God damn it. It's gonna disappear. I'm gonna lose him. I need to get out of the water and find them again. Where did they go? Is this them down there at the bottom? Okay. That took way too long. to be able to get them into a battle with me. Okay. We got him. We got him. Now I just gotta catch him. High schools are stupid. Hairspray, which is literally about it wasn't allowed. Recently. Allowed high schools to cast. Oh, that is wild. That I think about that. And like, again, like those musicals, I just wouldn't have known about back then. Yeah, in your high school, you could not do anything risque for a play. You would get in trouble for a character saying ass once. I feel like when it came to like plays and theater, I think they had a little bit more flexibility in my area for that aspect. But I definitely know that there were a lot of characters who were, you know, pretty much like told to, or a lot of people were told that, you know, you can't say ass to and things like that. But I think because of the overall aspect. Do I have shiny love disc? Let me check real quick. Yeah, you mostly did Disney. There was Disney, and then you also would obviously have, you know, any of those religious plays or religious coded plays. I don't think I have love disc. Let's go for love disc. You know, those in itself are also its own situation. You were mostly doing Little Mermaid and stuff. I know my sister. I think what also helped is that I had you know, in middle school, I had one teacher who I think was a very good ally for a teacher. Where he would go out of his way to expose you to media beyond what an average middle schooler would learn. And, you know, he was the kind of person who would when I tell you that this teacher could get away with a lot of things that they wanted to do. He was able to, in the summertime, get, you know, he would do a yearly summer trip with people who have graduated from his class, where they would charter, they would get a plane, parents and students would come along, and they'd go somewhere in Europe. I remember Italy and France were like the two that I almost went on. Like, this guy really tried to, you know, push the limits of what, like, a middle schooler could do. So I think that I probably just had a little bit of it, you know, because of them. Indirectly, they probably influenced a lot of decisions going forward for the better. You mostly did Grease and The Wiz. I don't know if The Wiz or I think Grease were not done at all in high school. I know Little Shop of Horrors, it definitely got done. But I'd really have to think about what plays my high school performed back when I was there. I know my cousin also was in the plays. But, yeah, it's one of those things where musicals, I feel like, are so often able to express stories in, like, like, queer stories. But they often try to get denied that same feeling. Just like you're saying, where so many plays and literature gets banned. My school was interesting. Yeah. I forget. Maybe it wasn't when I was there, but they definitely did a lot of plays that I probably hadn't heard of. And then, but I think, again, part of it was to expose us to different, you know, stories that you wouldn't traditionally see in most school places. For the people who know plays, why is Little Shop of Horrors interesting? I mean, like, I remember I went to a, what's it called? A Rocky Horror show for the first time only, like, 3 years ago. And that in itself was another experience. I'm glad that I went, legitimately. That was an experience that I am glad that I was able to have. And, again, that's just, like, an area of media that I didn't ever connect with. So, the plants eat everybody? Yeah. But, like, I didn't think there was anything... Oh, there's our shiny love disc. You know, I guess, like, maybe I'm more desensitized to that kind of thing because maybe we had it. Let's go. We got 2 shinies on that sandwich. Massive. Now to see if I actually had shiny love disc already. Let me see here. Number 332. I thought it would have been next to, Aloma Lola in the decks. So, was I correct in that? No, it's next to Quillfish, but I didn't have it. It actually went perfectly into the spot that it needed to go into. I love that. Alright, hey, before we continue this conversation, which I am genuinely enjoying, I need to run to the bathroom. So, if you don't mind, I am gonna use the bathroom real quick. And when I get back, I will see you all in just a moment. When I went to the bathroom... Hi, Emma. Welcome in. Sorry I was in the bathroom while you were gone. But I hope you're having a lovely day. When I was in the bathroom, I looked out of curiosity. I wanted to see what my high school drama club was, or what it was doing this year. You know, it's funny. It's been almost a decade since I've graduated already, which is kind of terrifying. But they're doing SpongeBob. That is the next one that they're doing. They did a Grimm's Brother Spectacular. They did a Charlie Brown Christmas. What else have they done here? I'm trying to look to see what else they had done over the years. But whatever Blythe Spirit is, I don't know anything about that one. So, we definitely did it. Like, you can see here, there wasn't a lot of, you know, the traditional ones. Like, I don't know many of these right here. And then here's a traditional one. I had to go back to April of last year for them to have done Wizard of Oz. So definitely a little bit more varied in what kind of plays. Funnily enough, when I Googled my school, I found out that the drama club had a Twitter account. So I was scrolling through their tweets to find what plays they had talked about on Twitter. Not how I would have thought I would find out my information, but hey, we got there. Alright, I'm going for shiny Phalanx again. Last time I was trying to do that, I couldn't get it. So, before I forget, I want to talk about another, obviously I looked at a lot of trans characters. I looked for a lot of, personal representation. And for me, my best friend, she had gifted me Tell Me Why for my birthday, and I spent like 6 months not playing it, and she kept being like, play it, play it, play it. Oh, my game just froze? Okay, we're good. And I finally got around to playing it, and I really understood why. I was actually, when I was doing research to talk about this, I saw that Tyler, the main character, and the creators of the game, they reached out to various different charities and, organizations that work with trans individuals to make sure that they were able to give an accurate and not a faked out version of what, the trans experience is like. Hi, John. Happy Thursday. Hope you're doing well. And it really does tackle a lot of the more, scary stuff of being trans. It goes into that feeling of returning home and having to introduce yourself, but introduce yourself almost and out yourself because of that. Tyler's sister would sometimes be like, you remember my brother Tyler, right? And then they'd sit there and one of the first interactions there was like, brother, oh, the entire town knew, but it's still that awkward reintroduction to yourself. What are we discussing? What are we getting at? Discussing queer representation of media? Yep. That's what we're getting into. Talking about queer representation in media. And I just have quite a few different characters that I wrote down. But it's kind of just an open forum. I love being able to hear other people's characters that they are strongly attached to, or maybe there's more of a connection for whatever reason. So I have primarily focused on trans individuals. However, I've been trying to at least diversify it and have more rounded options. And I know I had quickly I tried to talk about this and then my ADHD hit. But I want to make sure that I really do talk about Laverne Cox and her character Sophia in Orange is the New Black. Because, again, that was Netflix's, really first show that was able to, catch on in the sense of Netflix can make this kind of stuff. And I remember that was probably a lot of people's, on the topic of exposing you to what it's like being trans. She was probably one of the first, trans characters that a lot of people saw. And this is probably a decade ago at this point, I'd say. God, I can't even know how long ago that her character would have been added in. And it's one of those things that I feel not only is her character, exposing you to what it is to be trans, but if in the origin of, trans pride and stuff like that, it was black trans women that were leading the, you know, representation. So when you have someone like Laverne Cox being able to, you know, continue pushing that into like the mainstream media, it feels very fitting, you know? Normally, just so, John, I think it's better to just go LGBTQIA because or just do LGBT plus, only because I want to make sure that we're not like, you know, some people identify as intersex, queer, asexual, and while I know it's not your intention to educate and show that we, you know, use all of those, or at least the plus there so that people understand that we're not just, you know, cutting it off. It's like how people have tried to do the LGB alliance to be anti-trans. Like, I know it's not your intention, but for some folks that has that issue, it gets a good bit confusing. I understand. Like, again, that's why I try to come with the education and not the ridicule. Orange probably the first show to expose you to trans people and lesbians as a whole. Yeah, I think a lot of people probably had that, especially because, like, people our age. Betta Moore, thank you for following It Gets Better. In fact, you've seen much longer trails of that acronym. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I think that queer representation is ever evolving. I've talked about how in high school it was the Gay Straight Alliance, and then it became the LGBT Center, and now, you know, like, the acronym just evolves over time because language evolves and we learn more and we associate more. And Sean coming in and I don't know why the alert isn't playing, but Sean, thank you for rating in to It Gets Better. How was your stream, Sean? Tell me all about it. Oh, is everything just breaking right now? Maybe that's why. It doesn't even say data returned. Happy Pride. How are you, Sean? I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for sending your community here. If you don't know who I am, my name is baeginning. My pronouns are she, her. A lot of my community that'll be here will use Chloe. I have been an It Gets Better ambassador for a year and a half now. One of the only few original people that have been doing ambassadorship. And today I've been just kind of talking about queer representation in media. I think there's a lot of negative queer conversation right now, especially in America. And so I wanted to highlight a lot of characters, especially because, like, I know for a lot of us, being able to see ourselves in a character makes us feel like we exist. And I think that that is a very, like, vital thing. So that's kind of what we've been going on about today. Mango D, welcome in. I hope you're doing well. Everyone else coming in from Sean's community, hope you're having a lovely day. You were learning some Sombra. Another very queer-coded character. It's funny that you mentioned Sombra, because while I personally don't like Blizzard anymore, I did write, I was like, I feel like I have to put Tracer down. So in my list, I was eventually gonna get around to talking about Tracer, because, you know, being the face of Overwatch, I feel like she made a little bit more sense, but there's obviously other characters within the game. I think a lot of games these days are making a lot of queer characters as a whole. Like, it started off as Tracer as a lesbian, and then you get Soldier 76 being gay. You're getting a lot of these representations. And don't even get me, you know, I could go on and on about Apex. I might not know any of the characters' names, but there are bisexual, asexual, transgender, gay, like, all signs of the spectrum in Apex. That is a game where, if you need to ever feel represented, you will most definitely have that there. Take care, John. Thanks for stopping in. So yeah, I feel like I forget what I was saying as like the raid came in. So my ADHD is really striking today. Let me tell you. But I feel like on the topic of like maybe not exposure, but just another like mainstream show that I think I wanted to talk about more specifically because there's more to it. So, if any of you have watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you'll know that there are multiple queer characters in there. But I wanted to more specifically talk about Rosa and her character because part of why Rosa's character came out was actually because the actress for her was, you know, finally, as you know, coming out to herself and being herself more, and it was almost like she got to reflect herself in her character, and that in itself is also really just like reassuring to see, because, you know, that means it had like, you know, the entire support of, you know, the script writers and the directors, and her entire plot line of coming out to her parents is, I think, something we can all relate to, being bisexual or not. Like, if you're queer in general, that, like, conversation, and I know for some people, you know, they did it just like Rosa, where she sat her family down at a dinner table, and that's how she tried to tell them. You know, it's funny, because for me, I didn't have that with my mom, although we were driving to get food, but my mom had picked me up from college one day to go get lunch, and she was like, alright, your hair is getting long, your nails are getting long, what's going on? And just like, I don't even look her in the eye when I tell her this. I'm looking like I'm looking at you, straight forward, in the car, and I'm like, no, actually, I'm trans. And that was my coming out. Quick, very, like, I didn't plan it the way, or it didn't happen the way that I would have planned it. I don't even remember if I was going to tell my mom that day. But I do remember that moment for that reason, where, you know, I had definitely sat down quite a couple of family members and been like, hey, we're at dinner, this is me. Rip off the Band-Aid, literally. So I had done a lot of those, like, dinners, so again, like, even though Rosa was coming out as bisexual, I felt like I understood a lot of the emotion and the fears and worries. But I think the big thing a lot of the time is that because of negative representation in media, I think a lot of people who are maybe more closeted toward their family are afraid or nervous to come out because they're worried about what they've seen in media. Obviously, some circumstances go beyond that. I'm not invalidating any of those fears. But I know for me personally, one of my biggest fears of rejection, I stressed myself out more than the entire conversation ended up going every single time. To the point where I remember when not every family member knew yet, and there'd be like a party, and my grandmother would would come to me and she'd be like, hey, your aunt doesn't know whether or not that you're trans. And I would just be like, okay, you tell them, I can't be bothered at this point. Because it really was like that at some point, where I was just so exhausted for coming out to everybody. Whether it was because I was stressing myself or because it just, you know, it is exhausting telling everybody. And you don't have to tell everybody, but I have such a large family and parties are so common. It would have been kind of hard for like 50 people to come over and 30 people call me by the right name and 20 people not call me by the right name. You know what I mean? So I was kind of put into the situation where I either suffer with a dead name or come out to everybody. You're asexual yourself, so coming out was a bit easier than it could have been. You have a very accepting family, but you still got the, well, you might find somebody eventually, so you think ace representation is lacking and most normal people don't seem to understand it. I agree. You are 100% correct, Mitch. And first of all, I'm sorry that that happened to you. But I think things like asexuality and pansexuality are, especially for our parents' and grandparents' generation, something that is taking time to understand. The amount of time I've had to explain pansexuality to my grandmother, because that's what one of my cousins identifies as, you know, and trying to have them be able to educate others who then ask it, because it's true. There really isn't as much of that representation there. I think that, you know, a lot of people just associate pansexual with bisexuality, and so sometimes that almost gets erased for some people, and I do feel bad, because maybe you know, Mitch, I don't have any characters listed on my, like, ones to talk about today that are asexual. I think Apex has an asexual character, but I don't have any listed. Again, I primarily went down trans individuals just because I knew more about that. And, you know, like, back in, like, the gaming side of things, you honestly don't understand the difference. You just know what they are. So, there's a couple of things about bisexuality that sometimes people have a negative connotation toward identifying, because the idea of bisexual means two, if you want to break it down. And so to some people, bisexuality doesn't mean you would, like, you know, date a non-binary person. Obviously, I don't think 99% of the people who identify as bisexual mean it like that. But I think the best way to describe pansexuality is that from my my grasp of it and my way of, you know, explaining it to people, it's just you look beyond gender and how someone identifies. You pretty much just, you can like somebody for their personality, their spirit, whatever it is. So pansexuality is kind of just, you don't, like, not to say you don't care about the person's gender, but that doesn't stop you from liking somebody. And maybe I have somebody here who is pansexual and can shed a little bit more of an understanding of it, because maybe I'm wrong. But that's how I have explained it to a lot of my family who have asked. You missed the last bit of the convo, but your best understanding is that bisexual gender plays a role in your attraction. Yeah. Okay, so pretty similar to what I was saying, but you obviously explained it much faster because I'm a content creator, and therefore I tend to over-explain things. Oh, there's a shiny Passimian. Let's go. I needed one of those. Your friend tried to say that you were Pan, but you never identified with that label. And very much you don't even care if somebody's non-binary or not. Yeah, so, like, I think it's just a lot of the... Ooh, this thing a double edge. Good thing I'm a ghost type, so it can't hurt itself. Okay. So yeah, I think that a lot of people probably see the terminology and just like how a lot of a language ever evolves, we also have moments oftentimes where we will... what's the word I'm looking for here? Like, you know, sometimes we see people have a term that they maybe don't agree with because they are reading it in a different way. Because, and hey, you're valid for choosing to, you know, speak up about that stuff. I know for some people it's not the case. To be honest, you're not aware of any characters that are ace, but you kind of get why most stories are love interest. You know, I think that's fair to say. It's sad to say, but I do understand where you're coming from with that, Mitch. Well, you don't fully identify as MB, so you can't win. It's okay. You win here. You win here. And that's what's important. So, I actually... in the gaming sphere, there's another character that I do want to give attention to. And I know a lot of trans individuals like to tell people to play this game. And that's Celeste. If you haven't played Celeste, it is a very colorful, difficult platformer. But it's such a good story. The main character, Madeline, the creators has confirmed is trans, and it's her journey, like, climbing up this mountain. And I remember I had Celeste gifted to me back in 2018, and I streamed it not really knowing how I was going to be with it. I saw it as this difficult platforming game. And then I remember getting attached to the characters and attached to their, you know, the story that Madeline was going through and the similarities that we, you know, I think it was one of the few games that really tackled depression in such a unique way that, you know, you felt that, and like, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they also have, like, very good skills for, that they teach you about having a panic attack? If I'm remembering correctly, that was like another big thing, but correct me if I'm wrong. All the ace rep comes from The Lovelies by Alice Osman. Let's talk about love. All great ace representation. Maybe I'll have to check out those books there. Yes, Celeste gives breathing exercises. Okay. I was gaslighting myself into that, whether or not that was true, so I'm glad that I was right. And yeah, it gives you, like, the breathing exercises, because, again, a lot of what I've also been talking about today is how important a lot of the media that we've discussed today has been important for just exposing non-queer individuals to these feelings and these, you know, very serious mental health related struggles that sometimes being queer we deal with. Even if you aren't trans, the Celeste story is wonderful if you're just insecure about your body. Yeah, it's definitely like a dysmorphia, dysphoria, like, related story as well. So you can definitely find similarities in yourself beyond being trans. Rita's House is one of your all-time favorites. Betamore? Alright, Kaylin, Betamore. Sell me on it. Tell me all about it. I want to know right now. If you don't mind, of course. So, yeah, I think that Celeste is a gorgeous game. Between that and Tell Me Why, I think those are some of the more iconic trans characters in video games. If not, like, arguably some of the most. You know? So, I think that if you ever need, like, a good story with, like, a trans character, those are definitely the two to go down. But also, like, Life is Strange and, like, that entire company does such a good job at making their queer representation, which I think is why so many... I wasn't looking for you, but, like, we love you. It's one of my favorite shinies, so, like, I'll take it. But that pink bug just spawned in my face. I wasn't ready. I was just, like, rounding the corner, and then bam! Pink. I came here for the yellow one to be a shiny. The Phalanx. And instead we've gotten every other fighting type. But to say that I've caught 4 shinies on the day is pretty good so far. Pretty good. Maybe I can still find a 5th. We still have 10 minutes left. Just gotta hope that it's Phalanx. You know what we should search for? One of our favorites. Sorry, Castform's not in this game. So sorry. Can't do that. I swear, if you know what? If Castform comes in the DLC, I'll shiny hunt for it first thing. You're just thinking back to Sarah wanting a shiny, and here you are getting jump scared by them. Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, here, I will offer you one. I have duplicates. There is an entire box, Andy, here. This box are all shinies that I already have one of. I was like, you can take one of them off your off my hands. That's like 24 Pokemon to pick from. It's okay. But I understand wanting to seek the thrill for, you know, themselves. Not enough Kilowattrel? Plenty of Kilowattrel. Enough Kilowattrel. No more Kilowattrel needed. What sucks is that if I ever do want to complete this dex and I have to go for Pincurchin, I'm going to spawn in Shiny Kilowattrel again. I just know it. Unless I breed for the Pincurchin. And, you know, while I like the shiny hunting, I feel like it is a little bit more of, like, laid back. Like, you know, there's a creator that I've been watching a lot lately, his name is Alpharad, and he has a channel that he just uploads a game every day, and it's like 30 minutes of content. But, when, you know, the game feels like just background to keep your attention going, while, you know, you listen to, like, the podcast sort of discussion that was being had. And I feel like that's kind of what I use shiny hunting for. Like, it's more the basis of the conversation we're having, and the shiny hunting just kind of happens when it happens. You know what I mean? Like, if we find one, eventually we will. But sometimes it's, you know, less about the game and more about whatever we're talking about. Also, I am proud of myself. So, I wrote down 15 characters to talk about. And let it be known, I still have about half of those characters still to talk about. I have a habit of talking very quickly and getting through everything that I am talking about and then running out of ideas. Here I am pacing it a lot better. But I do feel like I should jump in and, you know, Sean rated and we were talking about that and Overwatch. And so I had actually written down Tracer to talk about. A lot of you probably know Overwatch as a game that a lot of, you know, it was very popular when it first came out, and through time, Overwatch and Blizzard would discuss, they would give like additional lore on their characters. Because at the start, the game was just, these characters were here, they had their personalities, but through comic strips or trailers of the character specific, we would get to learn a little bit more about some of those characters. And one of them being Tracer. And I remember there was this one Christmas special comic strip of Tracer coming home to her girlfriend, and they're sitting on the couch together, and like one of them I think is opening up a present. It's this very like heartfelt and very cute moment. You have new books to buy? Let's go, Zaz. I'll have to definitely look into some of those books too as well. And, you know, through those lores, and this is like a conversation in itself because, you know, hi Boo, hope you had a good sleep. So in like the lore of those characters, obviously they came out after, you know, like the game had come out. So to some people that are, you know, choose to be homophobic, queerphobic, etc., they look at that and they went, hubbub, hubbub, rub, 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 rub. Why are you forcibly inserting queer into these characters? You know? Like, it's not that they're being forced. They were probably always planned to be. There's very little force of a character being queer. I do have one negative instance of a character being written as queer that I actually have, like, I was going to talk about, but for the most part, a character is made with a thing in mind, and maybe sometimes they just like to tease out the lore, spread out. Or you get, like, a brief biography of somebody, but it doesn't paint the full picture. Because just like with some people, they don't make it their whole personality that they're queer. You know, I saw a TikTok the other day of a person who had applied for a job, and them and one other person that were applying, so there were two of them, were trans. But one of them was openly talking about it in their interview. Now, the person who wasn't openly talking about it got the job. And on the first day of their job, a coworker came up to them and would be like, so are you the, like, new trans person, kind of thing? And the person who was, like, caught off guard and was like, did the boss tell you this? Like, so then they, like, stormed into their boss's office, and the boss is feeling so bad because, like, they really were trying to be, like, a good ally. And long story short, they didn't even realize that the person they hired was trans because they weren't making that apparent with themselves. And, you know, they passed well enough that there was no idea. So they weren't ever talking about the person who was hired, but the other person. So, like, the boss and them had, you know, cleared the air and everything was fine. Because it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like they, at first they thought that they were outing, which is a valid thing, and then they just realized it was just, you know, miscommunication. And again, it wasn't like this person was closeted. They just, you know, some people don't want those labels. Some people don't want to be zeroed in on stereotypes associated with a certain gender identity or sexuality. That's why queer is also such a great umbrella term. Because being queer is simple to say, and it is a term that just you can use for everything in the LGBTQIA+. And I remember when I had come out, and for like a couple of years, I did not like to label myself as trans. Because I was afraid of the preconceived connotations that some people would have toward people that were trans. I was like, I just want people to know me as Chloe. You know, simple as that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting people to just know you as Chloe than telling them later on that you're trans. But after a certain point, I knew I needed to start wearing it as like a badge of honor. For me, the label is a huge part of who I am. I'm that interviewer who, you know, makes it known that they're trans. For a while, I was the person number 2 who got the job. And I think through seeing more outspoken individuals, through seeing more folks that are willing to, you know, fight for whatever it is that they are being oppressed or, you know, losing rights for. And I, for a while, wasn't that outspoken. And now, I think almost like wearing that badge of honor, calling myself trans, has only made me more outspoken. I think it's almost given me a confidence boost. Maybe it's a fake it till you make it kind of thing, but I really do feel like I've grown a lot just because I don't hide that part of me. And again, every single way is valid. No one's telling you you have to do things my way. When I first came out, I did not want to listen to any other trans people's trans folks' stories because I didn't want theirs to influence mine. I wanted my experience to be my experience. And for me, that was something that I wanted. That doesn't mean everybody has to go that way. Some people need to hear the other experiences to feel validated. I can see exposure and representation of queer people in media, but that doesn't mean I am going to, you know, use their story as the only thing that is me. I want to make sure that I am truly, you know, me while admiring that representation. 314. You go here. And you're 262, but we're gonna put you and swap you because the other one is a male Heracross. Oh no, they're both female. I was like, I wanted to make sure that I had a specifically a female one because the female Heracross is a heart, and therefore it is the best because it's adorable and has a little heart. Yeah, your poor dad used to be so queer and used to have queer as a negative term, and now it's being celebrated. So confused. Yeah, a lot of people are like that, and I know that there's some people that are older who don't like the word queer because of the connotation. You know, there was such a negative reflection toward saying queer for a while that some people don't even want to hear the word. Even now, for others, it's the best thing for themselves to describe themselves as. Sometimes we don't have the perfect word to figure ourselves out. Sometimes we don't know what, you know, we look for a term that we feel can most represent us. And sometimes it's hard to find that, you know? Think about all those people that are trans before more of, you know, just being trans was out there. That's why I talk about Madeline. I talk about Ellie, or not Ellie, Tyler. Sorry, I had Ellie written down from The Last of Us. You know, I have specifically another one that I really want to talk about. It's an anime. And I think that this one really meant a lot to me. Because I looked for, when I first came out, I was looking, again, for media to watch. And I Googled, like, best trans characters in anime. You know, something very, like, generic like that. And one of the anime that I found was called, the Japanese name is Horomusako, but the English translation for that is called Wandering Sun. That anime not only had one, but two trans characters. And they're very young. And it's their experience of going to school, not feeling like they fit in with the people that they're supposed to, dealing with their gender dysphoria, and I, you know, while I was very emotionally invested in it, when I tell you that I had to stop watching it at times because I felt like I understood so much about those about how those characters were feeling, and also how, you know, terrifying that is, and their age as well. It was hard, but it was an important watch. And it's one that I know a lot of people don't really know a lot about. And that's kind of a shame. Because I feel like it's probably one of the few animes out there that just straight up deals with its premise being primarily trans characters and their struggles. And again, the crazier thing about some of these anime that I've named, you know, I've named Sailor Moon, I've named Ouran High School Host Club, and now Horomusako. A lot of them aren't the last 5 years. You know, what we're seeing here and what we're getting is an understanding that being queer and being ourselves and having that representation has been in media for so long. You know? As early as the early 90s for Sailor Moon. You know, we maybe have games that have come out in the last 5 years, but there's early 2000s. You have plays like Rent that were written earlier than Sailor Moon. And I'm sure there's other queer plays that, you know, someone like Zaz could mention that would continue going down this trend that I'm saying here. People like to talk about how, or they like to, when they want to be negative toward queer folks, they want to say that they're only doing it because they want attention, or it's the fad, you know? That's their common thing that they will say. But the reality is that you can go back as far as, you know, even religious textures. Textures? Religious textbooks. Or having queer representation, not in a negative way. But a lot of this media will, you know, zero in on just the... Oh god, this is so bright. I'm sorry, chat. I am sorry for how bright this is. Classic Pokemon breaking the game and blinding yourselves. Ugh. I am terribly sorry. I don't know why it's extremely bright, but it is. You're gonna have to forgive me. I clearly did not know this was gonna happen. It's always in, like, caves, I feel like this happens. Okay. We're good, though. So, yeah, I try not to get blind challenge, literally. Don't worry, though. It's... Wow, that looks like a PNG. My game legitimately looks like it dropped to, like, 280p. A perfect game we have. So true. It's also my last, like, set of 2 Herba. So, I either have to go do raids, or we're just gonna run around and hope that we find some shinies that way. Ooh, Toxtricity also spawns. I know that Zaz will be thrilled, but I already have them, so I'd really like to not see Toxtricity. If you don't mind, game, could you supply me with the Salandit? Because that's what we came here for. We're the Salandit. I don't need Sableye either. It's just the Salandit. Hopefully female Salandit only. It's okay if one isn't. Because I would obviously need 2 at some point if I still want to complete the dex. But obviously the sooner we get it, the better. Oh, hi, Diglett. Diglett, you are not a poison type. Thank you very much. You can try all you want, Diglett. I don't think you're a poison type, though. But hey, live your best life, Diglett. Oh! That was very quick. I almost missed them. I saw it, like, in the back. Oh, and there it is. Look at that, Zaz. Look at that. Excellent. So now I could just get a second one? What's another poison type? Let me think. Let me look here. I need to find another poison type Pokemon that I could hunt for. Poison. I could do Grafaiai and Shroodle. I could also get, you know what, let's do a Grimer. Because I know they spawn right here. I'll do that. Next shiny. I knew somebody was going to say it. I knew so, especially because Varoom is a poison type. So I knew I'd see it. Just get back to shiny hunting. Honestly, it's been pretty nice to only do it once in a while. You know? Like, I was talking about it. I don't know if you were here for when I did. Of course, Varoom also spawned here. But I was talking about how I definitely feel like it's very good for, like, podcasty kind of talk. Like this conversation has been. Where we are able to, you know, talk about these things and just kind of shiny hunt in the background. Also, why did the music cut out there? I went into, like, an area and I turned back and there was, like, no music. Does this area just not have music here? You started breeding for the Hisuian Zoroark. I haven't even pre-ordered the DLC for this game to be able to shiny hunt for it. Why did those Mons pop up? Why did the Varooms pop up? What do you mean? I'm confused. What if I go this way? I was about to freak if that one was it. Okay, do the Grimers last if I go up here? It doesn't look like it. Yeah, I don't think the Grimers continue to spawn there. Okay. So I really just have to be this way. You traded for an hour? So my thinking about getting one was that I'll just wait for the Pokemon Home compatibility. Especially because I already have Shiny Zorua and Hisuian Zoroark. So, for me, I was like, I also don't need to stress about it yet. You know, is it cheating if I transfer them over? Maybe. But also, it's my playing experience, and I've already shiny hunted for them before. It's like Varoom, with your phone. You probably typed Varoom, Earthworm at first, or at one point, and so your phone just learned that. Honestly impressive. You didn't get the shiny in Arceus, so that this would be your first? Valid. Very valid. Hello, all of you Paldean Tauros. I already have one Grimer, so getting this would at least get me Muck, which is kind of why I'm like, sure, let's do it, because sometimes we're just going to have to overlap at this point with how many I've already caught. The hope is that I just don't see shiny Varoom. You gave me shiny Salandit already. Now just give me the non-Varoom. So, I remember, and I don't know, my anime fans, there is a... Oh wait, that's actually a really efficient way of spawning in the Pokemon. There is one anime that came out when I was in college that was pretty iconic for having very, very gay characters. And it was one of the few anime that I had watched that had gay characters, especially at that time. And that anime is Yuri on Ice. And funnily enough, I watched Yuri on Ice before I even came out, and I just fell in love with how happy Yuri and Victor were, and that whole dynamic. And I feel like that is another one that, why did you know? Because, you know, it's iconic in the sense that I also wanted to have various representation, so, you know, having them as the gay individuals that I talked about. You know, I think that sometimes being queer is kind of a write-in, or, you know, in like an anime, it's not necessarily a focal point of their character. And Yuri on Ice is a gorgeous ice skating anime. Hold up, I'm actually... You only knew that as the ice skating anime? You didn't know? Yeah, 100%. There is, like, some very... Hang on. Also, the music is just, like, really good. Let's do this one. This is one of the songs in Yuri on Ice, and I love the, like, music that they skated to. Just very, like, I fell in love with the music, I fell in love with the characters, and I learned a lot about figure skating. I could go into an entire conversation about why I love sports anime, but Yuri on Ice definitely did a good job. Surprised you knew it for ice skating more than anything. I think a lot of people just know it as that ice skating one, but I think a lot of queer individuals call it gay ice skating anime. They just add that extra adjective. Because, you know, it is very, just like, I don't know. It was right before I had come out, so it was one of those things where I wasn't diving into queer media very often. Out of choice. Not like I actively avoided it, but like, I was so oblivious to it that, you know, it wasn't a focal point. I still can be oblivious to certain things, you know. I remember when my ex and I were together and she got into her K-pop phase. Well, when they got into it, they would be like, oh my god, you gotta watch this dance, and like, you gotta watch this, like, music video. And I would respond with, like, the straightest face possible, and I'd be like, yeah, that was a good song. And it'd be like, God, how is it that you can't be like, oh, the dances, oh, the outfits, like, that wasn't me. I was oblivious to it all. I definitely just have this tendency to be more oblivious to certain things that I guess the best way to describe it was that I wasn't passionate, or I didn't draw any sort of connection to myself in it. So, you know, I became more oblivious. And then obviously, now that I've come out, I see a lot more. I connect with a lot more because I look for that representation and that feeling that, you know, everybody does exist. You know, it's not like we're a made-up story or a made-up demographic. And I think that overall, a lot of these characters have just done that. And again, Yuri on Ice got so popular to the point where, if I remember correctly, a professional figure skater for America actually went out and, like, performed a routine from Yuri on Ice, or performed to, like, the music of it. I also remember, like, there was a video series of, like, a figure skater that would review... I love those kinds of things when it comes to sports anime. There's another one right now on TikTok with a professional volleyball player who's watching Haikyuu for the first time, and they're like, here's my reaction to Haikyuu as a professional volleyball player. And they're, like, talking about it and, like, breaking down the moves and how there's a lot of, like, obviously it's hyped up for anime, but there's still a lot of accurate representation in those things, which I think is super neat. But yeah, Yuri and Victor, some of my favorite. They're just happy, you know. They're just happy. Like, they cry for each other. They are seen hugging a lot. It's just, it's a very wholesome relationship. You know, a lot of the time I've talked about maybe more of like struggles that these queer characters have had, and I feel like, you know, sometimes we do need some of those shows or games that aren't necessarily like, while we want to, you know, see ourselves in what we're watching or what we're, you know, doing that. Sometimes we also just want to see the characters happy because this is what we want to be, you know? I want to be happy. I want to, you know, exist. I want to see these things, and I want to see that same sort of representation. And I think that for some individuals, you see something like Yuri on Ice, and you immediately are like, this is what I hope to one day have, instead of, I relate to this in a sad and, like, emotional level. It's nice to get the spectrum, I think, is the best way to put it. You know? Alright, we're gonna look for Toxicroak here. Or Swalot. Both of them work. I have the poison one going for another 16 minutes, so it's entirely possible I could find a third Pokemon here. We'll see. It's honestly been a very good shiny hunting day. Unironically. Like, how many have I caught today? 7? 6? We're definitely up there in just amount of Pokemon that I have hunted for, that I've caught. Okay. But the music is definitely cutting out a lot more than it did on the prior update. I feel like you lose music in a lot of areas now. Or it takes longer for the music to ramp up here. And I don't know why the music is having issues in this game. But hey, what should I expect about this game? I do want to get, like, one more at the very least. I think that would be nice. Also, Shiny Gulpin's, like, a very, like, deep blue. And I like the color for Shiny Gulpin. I forget, I think my friend, one of my friends, their first shiny that they got in this game was a Shiny Gulpin. And they almost ran right past it. And then they had to do, like, a double take on it. And both of these ones stick out pretty well. If any of you remember during Legends Arceus, which I think Zaz would be the only person who was around for that time. Oh! I did say it's a very, you know, it's a blue. You wish you knew how many shinies you missed? Honestly, same. Well, can I go for 4? Let's see. Can we get a 4th shiny on this poison sandwich? Krogunk, Toxicroak, Gulpin are 3 that we would look for. Again, just like that Heracross, we kind of got jump scared into it. It just kind of poofed. into existence. And my brain almost tried to play a trick on me. I looked at that and I was like, surely that's not. Right? Right? Like, I am doing a fabulous job today, chat, of gaslighting the heck out of myself. I don't know why, but I'm doing a hell of a job at it. Everything I do, I'm just questioning right now. Like, is this shiny? Did I use the right thing? So, I had briefly mentioned that I did want to include, like, at least one... Gabby here gaslighting me in spirit. So true, boo. So true. I wanted to mention at least one negative, you know, queer representation in media. I will say ahead of time that the director of it, in hindsight, has said that they wished that they had either flat out not written this, or they wish that they had done it better looking back, because it's very hard to watch. But if you've watched the show Friends, you'll know the whole storyline behind Chandler's parent and how they put her in these shows that that the character was doing. Chandler was not very supportive of it, and you know, there was a lot of negative perception toward that character. And part of it was because of how the characters within the show treated Chandler's parent. And I remember I was looking this up a couple years ago, and I stumbled across just seeing that the director had, you know, in hindsight, wished that they had written that character better. Or, again, not done that storyline at all. Because it's true, sometimes in media, it's not all ways of feeling like we want to connect with that character, but sometimes we're, like, frustrated that the character was written the way that it is. And maybe, you know, you feel that with non-queer characters, but also there are some times where those queer characters get mistreated, and it just becomes hard to watch, being somebody who is already in that representation, you know, demographic. It's hard to watch as yourself being, you know, myself being trans becomes the, you know, the butt of a joke, instead of being able to feel like you're excited to share that this character is someone you can relate to. You completely agree? Yeah, it's heartbreaking, Infernal Desire. Like, sometimes we just don't get the proper way of, you know, representation. And sometimes the proper way of representation is literally just naturally letting the character, you know, be themselves. It doesn't have, you know, you look at a character like Ellie from The Last of Us. I don't think a single person batted an eye when Ellie was written as queer. You know? That was a character that you looked at, you gravitated to, and I don't remember much negative reception, if any, toward that. Sometimes you do a great job with your storytelling. And sometimes it doesn't feel like a retcon or, you know, something that you wish could have been done sooner. Sometimes it's that natural addition. And just like I mentioned before, you know, sometimes we as queer folk don't want to make our entire personality or make it known, you know, we are queer or we are trans. Sometimes we just want to exist. And maybe later on down the road, we then bring that up. Because that's a sign of it being natural. In the sense that, you know, you're not forcing it into a conversation. You're not feeling like you're forced to talk about it in a conversation. Sometimes it just happens to be like the right time to bring it in to whatever it is you're talking about. Like, why do these characters always have to go through bullying, being extremely abused, etc.? We're more than our sexuality and or gender identity. Exactly. Like, that was why when I was like naming some of the representation, I wanted to at least have some positive ones. Because it's true that a lot of the time we are getting representation, but it's through a lot of hardship. Which, you know, for some people is appreciated, especially if you're somebody who doesn't watch a lot of media. All these characters that I named might have gone through hardship, but I still very much appreciate them all. And for some people, I almost feel like they get written also to show the hardships that we are going through. You know? You look at a character in something that maybe they didn't get to experience what they wanted, or they came out in high school and they're bullying. While it, you know, we can all relate to that, sometimes it also just sends a message to the people that don't understand that. You know, it's one of those things where those stories deserve representation as well. Exactly. You know, one of my favorite shows in recent years that I've watched was Alice in Borderland. And again, like I said with everything, I will talk spoilers on some of this stuff. Because I remember I watched Alice in Borderland shortly after Squid Game came out. And I was like, oh, this is very similar to the vibe that, like, Squid Game was giving. But it was Japanese, so for me, I was like, that was right up my alley because I watch a lot of anime. And then I realized through watching season 1 that I really gravitated toward one of the characters. I was like, damn, she's so pretty, you know, like, just, I loved her personality. And then you get the backstory. Her name is Kuina in Alice in Borderland, and then you get her entire backstory about how she's trans. And, you know, you get almost like either a half an episode or nearly like, there was a lot of that episode dedicated to like her upbringing and her story, and she doesn't end up like having the greatest relationship with her parents, and it's that like heartbreak thing that we've talked about that we see in a lot of media. The ending, however, you know, at the very end of it, Kuina sees her parents, and, you know, they hug and share like this intense moment of almost like their parents are finally ready to not accept, but put the effort in, you know? Because I think and maybe someone here can relate to this. I think there are some parents that will accept you, but sometimes it's hard for them to put the effort in for you. And to, get our pronouns right, get our names right, those are all fine and dandy. It's nice to have all that. It's another thing to, like, see the effort. Something... Hang on. It might be hard to see, but I have this ring here. This ring my mom gave me for Christmas. Inside this ring, it's engraved, and it says, "I love you forever." And a card came with it, and it was supposed to be a ring that you give to your daughter. It's moments like that where the sentiment is the effort is being put in. It's beyond the accepting, and it's one of those things where you really feel like we're lucky. And anybody who has watched me will know that I am one of the first to say that I am very fortunate in that I have a very good support from my family. And not everybody else has that. Must have hit you so hard. It's a gorgeous ring. It really is. I unfortunately can't wear it for too long because the metal is, I think it's copper because it turns my finger green. I'm still new to jewelry, so correct me if I'm wrong. So I try not to wear it for too many hours, but I try to wear it on stream at the very least. But you're right. It did. And, my mom literally went to me and she was like, if you can't wear the ring because of that, it turning your finger green, that's fine. I want you to, what was more important was the message that it sent. And, I just sat there and I was like, no, it's more than the message, because the ring itself is symbolic. It could be copper. Yeah, I'm pretty sure copper is it then. So yeah, my ring finger ends up going a little green. And I remember it was funny, like the first time I saw it go green. I can even see like a little bit of a ring forming right now around my finger. Just because like from like sweat and stuff like that, it'll even do it. But I was washing my hands, and then I went into bed, and I realized it was green, and I was like, alright, I'm pretty sure I've heard this is a thing with jewelry. I'm not dying. I don't have, like, some disease. I'm just like, how do I get rid of it? And I might have scrubbed for, like, 10 to 15 minutes to actually get rid of all the green the first time. Now if it shows up, it shows up, and I'm just like, it'd be like that. But yeah, there's stuff like that. The very first time I got, like, a granddaughter card, my brother, while I don't have the greatest of relationships with him and his wife, the first time I got a card and it said to Aunt Chloe, it's a moment like that that you hold to your heart, because it's just like, they didn't have to do that. When your ex came out to her parents, I had a really hard time, but eventually started going to group therapy with her and understanding it. That's really nice. Like, I try sometimes to not include my parents. Since I've worked with American Eagle, or not American Eagle, but since I've worked with It Gets Better for so long, I helped with a collaboration with It Gets Better and American Eagle back during Pride Month last year. And I shared Or I got a text from somebody who follows American Eagle saying, hey, your picture went live. And I saw my sister fighting in the comment section toward the transphobes there. And, you know, she put a ton of effort in there. And I had to tell her, I was like, look, I appreciate that you're doing this. These people want to hate. And if you respond and they find out we're family, they will get more information out of this. You don't know these, like... And so I had to literally tell her, I was like, the last thing I want is for you or me or anybody in this family to get doxxed. So I was like, with all due respect, I needed her to delete that. I was like, I don't want you fighting people in the comment section, because the last thing I wanted to do was have something positive bring harm to us. I don't tend to bring up a lot of those things, because the last thing I want to do is put my family in danger or, you know, show them the negative. I make it real for sure, and they hear a lot of what I'm feeling, but I also try to deal with a lot of it myself. And I think that's not the best to do, but I definitely do a lot of that for, like, safety reasons. Your best friend was outing you when she was at a bar. She had good intention. You had to sit her down politely not do that in case we were attacked. Exactly. Like, you know, there's a lot of good intentions from a lot of people, and sometimes we just have to explain to them that those good intentions can lead to harm, not only to maybe, like, myself, but even, like, you know, the entire family. I come from a line of teachers. So, you know, you get some information, you get a lot of information that way. I just realized that I'm on the wrong scene, and I have been for a while. I am sorry. I realized I hit the wrong button. Oops. Alright. Chat, I need to use the bathroom real quick, so I will leave you with actual music, and when I get back, we'll continue this conversation. Alright, we're back here. Yep, still the wrong chat. Every month. It's okay, boo. It's okay. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of explaining. You know, again, my grandmother being the sweetheart she is, when I tell you that one of her shows that she always tries to watch, even before I had, like, come out, she was watching it, but she had been watching I Am Jazz, which is, like, another, like, you know, TLC kind of show, but it was all about, like, a trans person's life. Yeah, we have been shiny hunting Infernal Desire. I had done a lot of shiny hunting at the start of the year, and I've kind of slowed down a little bit on it, but I like doing it on my It Gets Better streams, because I think it's a great sort of background while facilitating the conversations that we're having. So, like, you know, I can just shiny hunt and turn my brain off having this conversation with you all, and, you know, still be able to you know, focus on what I'm doing and have exciting moments. So it's a nice, like, mix that it provides. Also, I need to evolve the Grimer here. So let's get Shiny Muck taken care of real quick. But yeah, I very much enjoy shiny hunting. And I do, if getting Herba Mystica wasn't as difficult, I probably would have a completed dex, but it being difficult ended up slowing my desire to continue doing it, because, like, I would spend my off days from not streaming, and I would be playing for 6 hours to get, you know, 20 Herba. And so it was one of those things where I would slow my... I like, it became, like, a lot of extra work for me outside of stream. You're going through the shinies right now in Violet? How many do you have right now? And, or what are you going for? We've actually had a good day hunting today. Let me see. How many have I gotten? So we go into the box here. We got the Grimer, the Muck, the Swalot, the Salandence, that's 3. We got the Basculin, 4. Oh, what else? Is there anything down here? I don't think there's anything else down here. There's the Love Disc, that's 5. The duplicate Heracross is 6. The Passimian is 7. Was that it? It might be 7 on the day. Yeah, it might be 7 that we caught today. Which, honestly, 7 in 2 hours is a damn good day. I currently don't have any more Herba left, so I have to go do raids. So for, like, the last, like, little bit of time, I'll just hang out and do some raids with you all. Oh, the shrines. I realized my brain auto-corrected shrines to shinies. You can see how they're close in word. You're going to the shrines, you're gonna shiny it after you complete the dex. Yeah, I remember I 100% looked up the shrines because I was like, I am not gonna dick around looking for that. I remember I tried to do that in Legends Arceus. For those who have played that, you know that there is the Spiritomb Wisps that you have to collect. And there's 108 of them that you have to find throughout the game. Let me tell you. I tried to do all of those at first on my own. And that was a terrible idea because once I started to look them up, I didn't know which ones I did and which ones I didn't do. So I would have to run through all 108 again. And if I didn't see it, I would just have to assume that I had already gotten it. Yeah, the wisps were definitely a headache. It was very, very tiresome. Also, chat, I think be proud of me. I had all of my 15 characters that I wanted to talk about today, and I did it in 2.5 hours. Honestly, I thought I would get done with that much faster, which is not what I would have wanted. I appreciate knowing that I was able to stretch out that conversation. Because sometimes I feel bad that I almost, like, I have a conversation and then I run out of, like, what I want to talk about, and then I just go back to, like, gaming. So today was, like, a day where I, like, really tried to, like, zero in on getting, you know, a conversation to last. The conundrum that you still do it for Akali and Genshin with the same struggle. What do you have to do with, how does the one in Genshin work? I didn't mean to start that raid. Or I didn't mean to, search for a raid. I meant to solo it. So yeah, I'm just gonna do a couple raids. That way, if I want a shiny hunt again, I actually have herbs on hand. So we're just hanging out at this point. Chat, do you know what is Genshin? Another game? Yeah, Genshin Impact. It's a game that Zaz and a couple other people that generally watch me play. It's a gacha, which is a nice way of saying it has RNG elements to unlocking characters that you like. You collect them and see them rather than going with a guide. Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, I need to hope that you don't click Psychic on me this turn so that I can actually survive here. Okay, you want the Thunderbolt. That's great. Cool. I think I'm good enough to go for a Thunder Punch. Oh, the Calm Mind makes it tough too, but I think I have to just go through with it here and then just click Thunder Punch and hope that you don't click Psychic again. That works. I'll heal up now. There are far too many Dendrocali. They did go for a Psychic too, but I outsped. But you've gotten most of them. You think you're just missing 20? Honestly, I don't know about any of you. I was never a fan of quest gathering. Like, when it came to quest gathering or fetch quests, they were one of the things that turned me off so much from the game in general. Please just, like, take out this guy, because, thank you. I was like, I would like to start off with full HP so I can belly drum and not waste a heal here. And I don't think the crit would have... Oh, I think the crit mattered. You're missing a ton. They really gotta... How many do you need for it? Okay... We belly drum. Okay, now I can... It goes for Thunderbolt. Perfect. Because now I click Thunder Punch again. And we heal up enough that a Psychic won't KO, and then we're good. Some are locked behind puzzles that you're too lazy to figure out. I don't think any of them were locked behind puzzles for Arceus. They were just in the wild. Although, Arceus was quirky in that you needed to really do it at nighttime, or else you would have had a much harder time seeing them. There's 110 of them. Okay, so it's just as bad as Arceus. Yeah, that is gross. Okay, I have the bonus. Yep, there we go. I was like, we get the bonus for being Terra'd and the Terra Electric hit. Okay, maybe like, just give me the herb here. First try herb? No, it was a bottle cap. Heck. I would have done one more sandwich if I had gotten an herb there. Yeah, that is insane. Now, I have a question. Because, well, not obviously, but like, you know. For some trans folk, it was more common. But were any of you in the topic of games and getting like that representation? Were you somebody who would pick the opposite gender of what you were assigned at birth in video games? Like, 90% of the time, I never understood why I wanted to pick the female character in Pokemon, but I always did. Like, I don't know, early on, I must have known more about myself than I let on, because I did not want to play any of the male characters. I was always like, give me the female protagonist 100% of the time. And I very much felt like you know, at first it was, you know, nobody even questioned it too with me. Because, like, it was so common amongst people my age to just pick the other, you know, the opposite sex, if you will. You usually pick the main character. You'd enjoy your characters wearing dresses and skirts. And, you know, knowing you, that makes sense. That makes sense. You feel like it's somewhat normal in that way? You know a ton of people who chose the other gender? Yeah. I agree. Like, I knew a lot of people who did too. But I also know that for, like, some trans folk, it was, you know, more wanting to see something similar to themselves. Or wanting to see more. But, like, I'm somebody who, you know, I started describing myself more as sapphic. And the reason that is that I get attracted to the idea of femininity. And so, if I can have a character present more feminine, you know, it's right up my alley. Or if I can, you know, make my character present... That's why I think I hate the school uniforms in this game. Because I can't not look androgynous. Like, this uniform's so different than my Sword and Shield character. Where I had, like, a puffy coat, pink hair. Like, it was a vibe. Your dad was always picked a woman because he wanted to look at a woman all the time. You could understand the trans POV though. I know a couple of cis folk who would also would say that the reason that they picked the, you know, opposite characters, that they wanted something that they would enjoy looking at. But there's definitely, like, that case for sure. Like, I remember if a game forced me to be one kind of character for the main antagonist, like, I wouldn't complain growing up, but I'd be like, nowadays I'd be like disappointed that the character doesn't have like an option. And like, I get it for some games, but like when I got to Fire Emblem and I was like able to choose the, you know, female protagonist, I was like, yes please? You made your Arceus character look like Kenshin from Rurouni Kenshin. It was great. I love that for you, Zaz. You always pick who you want to be in the game, not the gender who you want to look at. Some people are like that. Like, there are legitimately some people who you know, the gender of their character is irrelevant to their choice. Or for some people, it's the cosmetics. You know, I think of Final Fantasy XIV, where some people will, you know, pick their character solely based off of what cosmetics they can use in that game. Sometimes it's a much more simple reasoning than a lot of, you know, what we might try to put ourselves on. And I think that's something I relate to in a general sense. Like, I relate to, you know, my grandmother. You know, I love her, but she has this tendency to try to look at every small thing in the past and be like, I should have seen it back then. You know? Like, oh, you only wanted to, you know, shop and buy stuffed animals that were in the girls section, which again is a total stupid thing in its own right that I strongly don't like. But that's another story. But, you know, she would, like, associate and, like, try to pinpoint those moments and try to be like, yeah, okay, you were always there because of that. And, like, again, it's sweet, but sometimes it's not that deep, you know? Sometimes I literally just enjoyed this more than something else. You hate that the main characters are wearing so much clothing, and yet the females are barely wearing anything? That is a fair point. I know a lot of... There's definitely a trend in gaming to have sex appeal for the female-presented characters. And, you know, I made a joke when I was playing Fire Emblem that if the character had, you know, a lot of cleavage showing, they were evil. Because it the sad reality is that was kind of true. Any of those characters that, you know, the sort of sex appeal that they were, you know, they had there were unfortunately almost like, most of the time you don't need it, I think is the best way to put it. I don't feel more represented in media because you have this character doing this thing, or, you know, so on and so forth. Like, I like having genuine, but it's one of those things that you know, sometimes it's just like, it's shoved down. Okay, sorry, I needed to respond to a message real quick, so I got a little distracted. So yeah, it was one of those things where, it is very, very strange that, and it sucks because, like, it's just how media has, you know, shaped almost like from society. And, you know, like, it's, things need to change. And they are getting better for sure. So it is one of those things where I still want more to grow, but, you know, obviously we are still far away from realizing that every character doesn't need this lack of clothing to be a character that people engage with. Okay, let me do this. This thing is very... It's physically bulky, so I need to find a water... Do I have a water type that isn't Azu? Or, like, a special attacking ground type that I have prepared? I don't think so. Yeah, I feel like any of my, like, good ones... I don't think I can do this one solo. I've been trying to just do 5-star ones right now while I look for another herb or two. But unfortunately, I don't think that one is doable because it's a physical wall and my only good Pokemon for it are physical attackers. I also think that we're at the point with, like, character customization that a game needs to have customization options, especially because it makes you feel represented. You know, if you want to have a masculine presenting but androgynous looking character, you should be able to have that. Games that lack character customization, I'm looking at you, Pokemon, oftentimes are more, there's more disconnect from a, you know, a person who could have the character customization and find themselves. So it's one of those things where I feel as though you end up just... there just needs to be more as a whole. Scarlet and Violet did allow the male character hairstyles. Yes, they did do that. That's a step in the right direction. But, like, I still, you know, in terms of, like, the clothes and fashion are something that is very important to a lot of individuals, male, female, and non-binary presenting. And being able to express yourself in what you're wearing is something that a lot of people look for. That's why some games people will, like, solely play for the fact that it has, you know, such depth of character customization. And, you know, it's one of those things where I don't know. I feel like a game company, I understand that, you know, you want to make the game engaging, you want to make it a good story, whatever the case may be. But, like, if you just put a little bit more effort in, like, making people feel like they can, you know, find something about or similar in themselves, I think that all it will do is benefit you more. Like, there are games you know, like, even like this game, for instance, with like skin tones. Skin tones are such a rough area in character customization, because I know for a lot of black individuals, they struggle to still find their skin tone in games, and when they have the options, sometimes those options aren't enough, or they only offer like one shade. You know what I mean? And it's actually really cool for that. Shovel Knight has gender select mode where you can change between the male and female models. Same physics, same hitboxes, you can even customize. See, that is great. I had no idea that Shovel Knight did something like that. That is, you know, such a simple thing that just makes people feel good. That it doesn't change the game at all, but it makes you appreciate the game more. Again, you know, they didn't make the guy character hit harder and the female character have a smaller hitbox. They just, you know, made it so that you can be yourself or be something you want to be. And I think that that's the overall, you know, conversation that I wanted to have today, is that a lot of us just want to be ourselves, and sometimes it's hard to be ourselves especially when we don't feel like we can see ourselves in anything. The more representation that you get, the more exposure it brings to the general populace, and then also allows us to feel like there are people out there that we can relate to or understand us. Maybe Timmy isn't a gay actor, but is playing a gay character. You know, soon we'll start to have those kinds of things change. But just to see that character exist, you know, it's why I gravitate to, you know, someone like a Neil Patrick Harris, because he is just this, like, outwardly person, and it's so ironic that his character in How I Met Your Mother is this polar opposite of him, literally, in terms of sexuality. And you listen to Neil Patrick Harris and you hear, you know, the stuff that he says, and you know, you can't help but feel like at least for me, I want to be able to shed light on those topics the way that some of these actors can. You know, I want to be able to share my experiences and, you know, have people feel represented just by listening to me. Even though I've talked a lot about, in media, games, anime, you know, things that aren't the actual actor or actress, I still feel like you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't trans actors and actresses out there. There's obviously gay and, you know, lesbian character, you know, actual people out there. So it's one of those things where I hope to one day just be able to continue to be that, you know, face, to eventually be, you know, maybe 50 years down the road, somebody can be like, I watched Baeginning, and watching her allowed me to, you know, finally feel more comfortable with myself. And that was like a step forward. Maybe it's, you know, a hope. Maybe it's a dream, but it's a goal of mine. I want to feel like being here today and being here any day, or being on my own stream. Like, I want to feel like I am helping somebody feel more represented than maybe they were an hour ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. And I'm sure that's not just me. I think that a lot of the ambassadors here also feel like that. We wouldn't be here on this platform, you know, using our storytelling if we didn't want to help shape a little bit of society in a better way. If we didn't want to help impact those. And like I said, maybe, who knows, down the road, little Timmy can see, you know, a VOD of mine, or they see me streaming, and they finally feel as though there's representation, and little Timmy ends up being little Tammy. Little Timmy is a, you know, a common trope name that I use in my own stream, so for those who wanted context as to why I chose Timmy. You know, there's a lot of, I think, even for me, I know that I only named a couple of characters. I only named a couple of actors or actresses that exist. And I had other people, you know, Kaylin and Clyde named like 4 books that they like. And I was able to learn even more about like other representation here, because some areas are not my area of expertise. And I am the first to admit that. We need more people in the world like this. You know, it's, I think it's a very tall order to want that. But again, I really feel like, Infernal, that there are, especially on this platform, many individuals like myself. If we just, sometimes it's hard to find them, you know. Maybe you're a League of Legends only watcher, and you don't go into Pokemon, so you don't see someone like me. You don't, you know, maybe there's a just chatting, outspoken, you know, non-binary person who, you know, only streams just chatting, and so they never go into a game category that you know. And, like, I think that there's beauty in us being able to use this platform and help show that representation. And I think there is a lot of us out there, just, you know, Twitch doesn't have the greatest of discovery and discoverability. So we have to make our own discoverability, whether it's through other means, posting on other aspects, or, you know, coming onto a channel that isn't ours. It Gets Better I don't own. It's just a channel that I stream on. I help storytell, and I help to, you know, give people a perspective that maybe they wouldn't know because they watch Data Dave, or they watch Lilith, or they watch Spoofy, but they followed here, clicked on to see who was here today. And I just really appreciate the work that we've been able to do here. This will be the last raid that I have today, as my time is actually winding down already. Which is kind of crazy to think about. I really do feel like I had a very, very good conversation today. Probably one of my favorite that I've done. You know, at this point, let me think here. This is, I think, my 15th time streaming on the It Gets Better channel. Plus, I've done 2 extra things. So we're getting close to 20 times that I've streamed on this channel. And so, of all the conversations that I've had, I think today was probably like one of my favorites. You really enjoyed today's stream? I'm glad. I'm glad that I was able, you know, I stepped out of my, I will be honest, I stepped out of my comfort zone. Infernal Desire, thank you for following It Gets Better. You know, I stepped out of my comfort zone with this one. I will be honest. I know anime, but for me to know anything else was, you know, I messaged my best friend, and I sent her my list, and I was like, hey, before I go live, do you think I have enough of, like, iconic characters that people know of? I want to make sure that, like, I'm not missing somebody obvious. Because I was like, this is something that I haven't done, and it was really nice to be able to share those. And I'm glad that I accomplished that today. So, I'll remind anybody else who might be new here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Baeginning. My pronouns are she, her. My next time I stream on this channel is going to be in April. But I stream on my own personal channel 4 times a week. So there's plenty of me, and there's plenty of other people that stream on this channel. I think if there's one thing about me that's consistent, is that I will always advocate for you to watch other people, not just me on here. I love knowing that when I raid into the stream, 4 or 5 new people from my own community follow the stream. You know, it's nice to know that I have people who want to follow me on these journeys and help listen to these stories. And just like that, the final raid on the day, I actually got another herb. How fitting. Let me save my game here. Alright. So, with that being said, please, again, if you enjoy, it gets better. I know for a fact, if you actually go on the schedule tab here, like, if you click the schedule option, look at all the people here that are going to be live, you know. Tomorrow, we have somebody. Sunday, we have somebody. This schedule is filled with people who are going to be streaming on this platform. There's constantly people here, and you're never not going to have a, you know, a moment where you're going to have somebody to listen to and hear their perspective. And I think that that is really, really nice to be able to see. But again, with that being said, it is my time here. We've had a lovely 3 hours here, 1 hour on my stream, and I think I am gonna, you know, go get myself some food. I gotta go record some stuff for my own personal stuff, but, you know, thank you everybody who came out and listened today, joined in. It's really fun when I get to even meet people that don't even know me for my own stream and happen to come here and enjoyed everything. Now, with that being said, I am going to raid another ambassador. And, you know, I also want to raid this ambassador because, not only because they're an ambassador, but they also just got partnered recently. So it'd be really nice to be able to give Emrys a lovely raid and, you know, share a little bit of love there. They're doing the Sims, so it'll be... Can you do the raid commands, Az? Thank you. Oh, no, it worked for me. It just took a second. I forgot that it has, like, delay. So, go hang out there and Emrys' stream, and I will catch you all either on my own channel or here next month. Take care.